What does John mean when he talks about this Antichrist figure, whom he says, you've heard that the Antichrist is coming, but you need to be aware that many Antichrists have already come. He's saying that there are people already in the day of his readers who fit the qualifications of an Antichrist, someone who denies that Jesus is the Christ. But John here is referring to much more than what happened in those first decades of the Christian church. The idea of an Antichrist, a person who stands in opposition to God's plan to install his son as the anointed king over all nations, appears right through the Bible from the very beginning. Let's do a quick survey. The Father's purpose from eternity was that all of creation would be in, by, and for his Son. The nations would be his inheritance, and he would rule over creation in union with his bride, humanity. This purpose is behind the creation mandate for humanity, to fill the earth and rule over it. Now, the devil hates this plan, and his purpose is to oppose all that the Father has planned. That's what the title Satan means. Adversary or opponent. So in Eden, he came to tempt the woman and man and to try to derail God's plan for them by getting them to disobey God and obey him instead. So as Paul says in 2 Thessalonians 2, the initiator of this opposition that we see in the human race against God is the devil himself. He's been working ever since Eden to empower and motivate human beings to rebel against God. Now, God's response was to declare that the devil's plans will come to nothing, that his plan for his son to rule still stands firm, and the devil and his works will be destroyed by the promised offspring of the woman, the Christ. So the devil's focus from that moment on has been to try to destroy that offspring, to be Antichrist. Now, who then was the first human Antichrist in history? Well, it's in Genesis 4. Eve has two offspring, Cain and Abel. The question is, which is the offspring that will carry the promise? Well, not who we might expect. Instead of Cain, the firstborn, Abel is the one whose offering is accepted by the Lord, indicating that he is the one. So Cain rises up in anger, opposes God's choice, and kills Abel, seemingly putting an end to the promise because he's destroyed the offspring. However, Eve has another son, Seth, who becomes the heir of the promise. And then two family lines are established, one headed by Seth, one headed by Cain. Those from Cain's line, the sons of God, seek to corrupt the line of Seth by taking the women, the daughters of men, and making them their wives. That's what that passage about the Nephilim is all about. It's not about angels breeding with humans. Then Noah. Noah was the son of Lamech, a descendant of Seth, and therefore the carrier of the promise. And Noah has the entire world standing in opposition to him. Cain's line ends with another Lamech, who is just like his ancestor, only worse, and he's a picture of the nature of humanity at his time. God judges corrupt humanity in the flood, but makes sure that the offspring, Noah, is saved. After the flood, another division occurs between Noah's sons. Ham shows disrespect for his father, while Shem and Japheth show honour. The genealogies that follow show that Ham was the ancestor of all of the peoples that would become the great enemies of Israel, the Egyptians, the Canaanites, the Babylonians, the Philistines. Shem became the ancestor of the Semitic peoples, out of which came the Israelites. And just an aside, Japheth was the ancestor of the peoples outside the boundaries of these regions, into Europe and Africa and Asia and beyond. Out of these two lines came two significant figures. Cain's grandson Nimrod, who led the building of the city of Babel, the place where humanity again tried to overturn God's plan for humanity to fill the earth, and Shem's descendant Abraham, who was chosen to carry on the promise and whose offspring would become the people of Israel. Abraham had two sons, one of the flesh, Ishmael, and one of the promise, Isaac. Then Isaac had twin sons who struggled together in the womb, with Esau being born first, but Jacob, the second born, being the one God had chosen, who took his place. See how this pattern keeps being repeated, of the chosen seed being opposed, but still prevailing against the opposition because of the certainty of God's promise. Over and over, we see the stories of opposition to God's plan being worked out through the people he's chosen. Sometimes it's individuals like Joseph, whose brothers sell him into slavery, and then through Potiphar's wife ends up in prison, but through that God saves Jacob and his whole family. Or Balaam, the false prophet who tried to curse the Israelites but could only bless them. And sometimes it's kings and nations like Pharaoh in Egypt, the Philistines and other nations who constantly attacked Israel in the land. And then finally, the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar, the spiritual and political descendant of Nimrod, who had established his kingdom. And Nebuchadnezzar, in a way, embodies all that the Antichrist is about. He desecrates and destroys the temple. He takes the Jews captive. He enslaves their king. And as we know from the book of Daniel, builds a massive statue of himself and demands that all his subjects fall down and worship him as their God. The frequency and fierceness of Antichrist then increases in the New Testament with the actual arrival of the promised offspring in Jesus. From the moment of his birth, when King Herod tries to destroy him, through to his death, when he is betrayed by Judas and crucified by the Jews and the Romans together. But as we know, the Father had this plan from eternity. So these evil men who thought they had destroyed the offspring were actually doing God's will. Because by Jesus' death, he redeemed many. And his resurrection demonstrated that neither sin, death, or the devil will be able to destroy the promise. Now all of that is part one of what John means when he says, "So now many antichrists have come." But part two was that there were also people in their day who matched the profile of the Antichrist, the false teachers who were trying to deceive them by preaching a false Christ. And in a sense, this has continued right up to the present day and will continue until Jesus returns. John said, "By this you know the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesses that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God. And every spirit that does not confess Jesus is not from God. This is the spirit of the Antichrist, which you heard was coming and now is in the world already." The critical issue for John's readers, including us, to face, to be prepared for, isn't primarily what's going on over in Rome or up in Jerusalem or in America or Russia or wherever, with all the political machinations of empires and rulers. The critical issue is what's happening in our own church, our own communities, the threat of people bringing false teaching, our own confidence in the gospel, and our own faithful proclamation of Jesus to our generation.